So, Professor John Tehan was kind enough to join us today. John Tehan is a professor and chair of the Department of Religion in Hofstra University. He's been on the staff there full-time for almost 20 years. His main research focus is on the cognitive evolutionary study of morality and religion, with a special interest in religious morality and religion's role in conflict. He wrote a book on that topic, and today he is kind enough to join us and tell us about how Charles Darwin and the theory of evolution has impacted us today. Thank you, John.
Good morning. So I want to thank you for inviting me here today. I'm particularly glad to be joining you on your celebration of Darwin Day, and I'm particularly glad you all braved this beautifully frigid day to be here. I'm fighting off a cold, so I'm going to have to interrupt to take some drinks throughout this. I hope it won't be too distracting. Anyway, the ideas and the work of Charles Darwin has been very important to my intellectual life, my professional life, and I'd like to begin by saying a little bit about my journey into Darwinism and about my path from being a Darwinian philosopher to being a professor of religion. I came to Darwin not directly, but through the influence of the great American philosopher John Dewey. In graduate school, I chose to do my doctoral dissertation on Dewey because I was drawn to his humanism. My focus in graduate school was on ethical philosophy, but I found much of what counted as serious ethical theory was dry and disconnected from the moral dilemmas and challenges that I believed needed the rigorous analysis of philosophy. Then I came across John Dewey, who proclaimed that the task of philosophy was not to focus on the problems of philosophers, but on the problems of men. And I was intellectually and ethically smitten. As I studied Dewey, I came to see how deeply grounded his entire philosophical work was in the evolutionary framework provided by Charles Darwin. Interestingly, Dewey, who perhaps more than any philosopher of his day, recognized the significance of Darwin's evolutionary theory, not just for biology, but for philosophy and the study of humanity. And he came into the world in 1859, the same year as Darwin's masterpiece on the origin of species. In 1909, Dewey marked the 50th anniversary of the origin by writing an essay entitled The Influence of Darwin on Philosophy. Here Dewey sums it up. So prior to Darwin, the impact of the new scientific method upon life, mind, and politics had been arrested. The gates of the Garden of Life were barred to the new ideas. The influence of Darwin resides in having conquered the phenomena of life for the principle of transition. Dewey recognized that the import of natural selection went well beyond its biological significance. If humans, as biological creatures, were the product of a dynamic natural process shaped by natural needs and desires, then all aspects of human existence were now open for a reevaluation, including morality and religion. Now, Charles Darwin himself, of course, saw clearly that his theory of evolution through natural selection clashed with dearly held and widely shared religious beliefs of his day. His concern for the religious controversy that was sure to come was at least part of the reason he delayed publishing his ideas for 20 years. And it also helps to explain his extreme caution in discussing the application of his ideas to humans. In the almost 500 pages of The Origin, Darwin mentions humans just once, and almost in passing. Near the very end of the book, he suggests that these ideas, as these ideas became further developed, quote, light will be thrown on the origin of man and his history. Now, Darwin could afford to tread lightly on the issue of human evolution because he knew the implications of his work for humans would be lost on no one. And he was right. People immediately picked up on what evolution meant for human beings, and its implications for religion were at the forefront of the controversy. A major clash between evolution and religion in Darwin's day is familiar to us, for it is a conflict that still rages today as stunning as that may be. This is the incompatibility between an evolutionary account of human origins and a biblical account of human origins. We know all too well the argument from opponents of evolution, that an evolutionary account of humanity descending from a long lineage of pre-human animals through the process of natural selection is an assault on the biblical account of God, making each creature separately, each according to its own kind, in 6 days, no more than 10,000 years ago. And we must admit that the fear that evolution overthrows a literal understanding of Genesis is well-founded. Evolution does refute Genesis, understood literally. The creationists are right about at least this one thing. That's the only right thing they get right. Right? You cannot believe in Darwinian evolution and believe in a literal interpretation of Genesis. They are incompatible accounts. But the situation is in fact much worse for creationists. Not only can you not believe in Darwinian evolution in Genesis, you cannot believe in modern physics, astronomy, chemistry, archaeology, geology, paleontology, to name just a few, and a literal reading of Genesis. For all of these sciences point to a dynamic and ancient universe. For creationism to be correct, all of these sciences must be wrong. And not just wrong in some of the details, but fundamentally flawed. Now, this is a point that rarely gets into public discussions over the teaching of creationism in the science classroom. The case against a literal reading of the Bible is so overwhelming that on an intellectual level, the evolution-creationism debate is just silly. If it were not for the unfortunate political and social influence creationists wield in our society, we should just ignore these people till they go away. However, because of the ability of religious fundamentalists to influence public school policy, we're forced to pay close attention to them. However, today I want to focus not on the political battles between evolution and creationism, but on the deeper levels of contact between Darwinism and religion. What sometimes gets lost in the heated battles over creationism is that many religions and many religious people do not adhere to a literal interpretation of the Bible. The Catholic Church, for example, does not, and the Church has no doctrinal disputes with evolutionary science. This goes for many Protestant denominations as well. Most forms of Judaism have found little problem integrating Darwinian evolution into their religious worldview. Now, the situation of Islam is more complicated, but suffice it to say that there are many Islamic voices that also speak in favor of Darwinism. In fact, it is interesting to note that the zealousness and the intellectual emptiness of creationist attacks on evolution have produced a sort of backlash in certain circles, including scientific and academic communities. It's now very popular to promote the idea that there is no conflict between evolution and religion. That as long as one understands that evolution answers questions on empirical matters and religion addresses moral and spiritual matters, there can be no conflict. This led the famed evolutionist and admitted atheist Stephen Jay Gould to advocate for what he called a respectful and loving concordat between science and religion. Now, I believe that this position, while politically expedient and perhaps strategically wise, given the current environment, takes a superficial approach to both evolution and religion. Clearly, there are religious traditions that have serious problems with Darwin, and we cannot get around that fact by denying that those traditions are legitimate religions. We may not agree with these views or respect them, but to millions of people, that's what religion is, and evolution does not fit into their views. So perhaps what those trying to patch things up between Darwin and God ought to say is that there is no necessary conflict between the two, that with many religious views there is room for both. This is more accurate and more respectful to the diversity of religious outlooks. However, this still does not fully recognize just how far Darwinian evolution reaches into the domain of religion, and that's what I want to look at today. In 1859, Darwin made a prediction in the conclusion of The Origin. He said, sounding ever so much the seer, "In the distant future, I see open fields for far more important researches. Psychology will be based on a new foundation, that of the necessary acquirement of each mental power and capacity by gradation." So this is the insight that so impressed John Dewey. Darwin's prediction that psychology would someday be based on a new foundation is coming to fruition. Over the last several decades, evolutionary thinkers have laid the foundation for an evolutionary psychology. This discipline works with the premise that Darwin set out 150 years ago. The brain is a physical organ, and as such, it has been subject to the forces of natural selection, just as any other part of our physical makeup. Therefore, our study of the brain must take into account what survival tasks humans needed to accomplish in order to successfully reproduce throughout the course of our history. So just as our hearts and lungs are what they are today because of the tasks they needed to serve in our ancient past, so too what our brain is today and how it functions today is a result of its evolutionary history. Given this, we should be able to detect cognitive and emotional tools that were designed to serve the demands of evolutionary competition. So researchers from a variety of disciplines have been using this approach for some 50 years now to investigate human behavior and beliefs. There's now an impressive body of literature providing an evolutionary account of human sexuality, including mating and parenting strategies, cooperation, social organization, and morality. But most recently, and this is over the last 20, 25 years or so, many evolutionary theorists have turned their attention to religion. And this is a most fascinating field of study. It's a relatively new field, and as such, it's subject to all the growing pains and skepticism new fields are prone to. However, in my view, the study of religion from the perspective of an evolutionary cognitive science represents one of the most significant developments in the modern study of religion. Clearly, this field is too complex and diverse to adequately present in a brief talk. But I would like to give you a taste of how this field is approaching religion, and then talk about what this might mean for religion. Right? So I'm just going to do a couple of the ideas that come out of the cognitive science of religion. So cognitive science sees the brain-mind to be a complex system composed of numerous processes or mental tools that evolved because they provided a survival, reproductive advantage to our earliest ancestors. These mental tools continue to function today, even if they no longer serve the same ends, and in fact may serve different ends. So for the sake of example, I'll discuss just two. One of these is called an agency detection device. So in a dangerous and uncertain environment, such as that inhabited by our ancestors, it was crucially important to be able to detect the presence of anything or any creature that might be around that could act in ways that could do you harm. This was so important that humans have developed what's been called a hypersensitive agency detection device that generates a good deal of false positives. That is, perceiving agents when there's no one there. All right, the rule is better safe than sorry. So this is something that you're all familiar with. We do it all the time, when we see faces in clouds. Right? Probably one of the most common and visceral one is being woken in the middle of the night by some strange noise, breaking glass. Your brain immediately goes to, who's there? Right? Your concern is that there's an agent, there's somebody there breaking into your house. Right? When you're walking down a dark and unfamiliar street and you hear a noise up ahead, immediately, right, your brain has already started looking for an agent, right? Who's down there? And a whole cascade of physiological events are taking place to prepare you to deal with whoever might be there. So this agent detection is a survival mechanism. You can imagine how important it is today and how important it was for our ancestors. And it's so important that it's hair-triggered, right? We detect agents all the time, even when there's no agent there, because it's much better to be safe than sorry. Much better to be fooled and think there's somebody in the basement than to think there's nobody in the basement when there actually is. All right? So this is the strategy that evolution is going to favor. Agency detection. And there's a slew of research showing just how easy it is to trigger this mechanism. All right, so that's one. Humans are also, and I love this phrase, we are teleologically promiscuous. That is, we are constantly searching out patterns. We're looking for meanings and purpose. All right, this is not something that just hits us. We're searching for it. Right? And we can see the evolutionary advantage of this. Being able to detect a pattern provides us with rich information that can guide us to successful prediction of future events. You need to know how things work, how things are connected, how one thing signifies something else, how a rustling in the grass can signify danger, how certain plants, when you take them, make you sick. You see the connections. So humans are constantly searching for patterns, connections, purposes. Discerning a purpose allows us to understand how things function and how they might be used for us, by us, or against us. So again, these are not conscious strategies, but are rather intuitive processes, automatic processes that are working below the level of conscious awareness that help us make sense and deal with our environment. And these are just two of the tools that make belief in agents who have shaped our destiny and who guide our fate, that is, God's, natural and intuitive. Justin Barrett, who's one of the seminal figures in this field, provides a nice statement, a summary of what the consensus position in the field is. So he writes, "Belief in God requires no special part of the brain. Belief in God requires no special mystical experiences. Belief in God requires no coercion or brainwashing. Rather, belief in gods arises because of the natural functioning of completely normal mental tools working in common natural and social contexts." So according to this cognitive evolutionary approach, religious belief comes naturally to human beings, which helps to explain why we find religious beliefs throughout the globe and throughout human history. It also helps to explain why religion persists in the face of evidence and arguments to the contrary. Religious belief is generated by these unconscious mental tools, not by reason and not by evidence. And so therefore, reason and evidence are often impotent against these unconscious mental tools. Now, this is true for mental tools in general, not simply for those underlying religion. But of course, the fact that religion comes naturally says nothing about whether or not religious claims are true. And in fact, this evolutionary approach challenges the truth values of these basic religious beliefs about God. As belief in God is generated by tools that evolved to promote survival, not to find God, God beliefs seem to arise as a misfiring of these tools. And there's a fascinating debate within the field about just what this view means for our belief in God, whether it's misfirings, whether there's something deeper there. But however, whether or not religious beliefs are misfirings, the fact that they do persist and the fact that religions play and have played such a significant role in human history suggests the possibility that such beliefs provided some advantage to humans during our evolutionary history. And indeed, this is a position that finds support from an evolutionary approach to religion. From this perspective, religions developed to promote pro-social behavior within groups as human societies became larger and challenges of social cooperation became greater. So the function of religion has been to bind groups into moral communities and to extend the circle of ethical concern beyond the limited tribal boundaries of early human society. Religion, it appears, has played a key moral function in human evolution. Now, this is not to suggest that there cannot be morality without religion. This account suggests instead that rather than morality being the product of religion, religion can be seen to be an innovation that serves human morality. Nor does this approach deny the often horribly immoral things done through and by religion. In fact, this evolutionary approach allows us to understand the relationship between religion and violence. So religion serves to extend the moral boundaries of the group, but it does not erase those boundaries. And one of the most robust findings of moral psychology is that our moral concern is for those in the in-group, right? Not for those outside our group. So religion, which is shaped by that moral psychology, is a powerful tool for promoting sacrifice for the in-group, right? And sacrifice of the out-group, both in the name of God. So what does all of this mean for religion? For one, it means that the challenge presented by Darwin to religion goes well beyond simply requiring us to reinterpret some biblical passages. The evolutionary analysis of religion offers an account of how it is that humans came to believe in gods and how they came to believe the sort of things they do about gods. It can also offer an account of why people can be so sensitive to having their God beliefs challenged. In other words, evolutionary theory is now offering us a scientific inroad to our sacred beliefs and values, those areas supposedly reserved for religion. So this poses a much greater challenge to religion than simply contradicting Genesis. Now, one may also question whether a Darwinian account of religion necessitates atheism. Richard Dawkins famously said that Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually satisfied atheist. And certainly evolutionary theories of religion can serve as powerful weapons in the arsenal of atheism. However, I do not believe that accepting this evolutionary account of religion requires one to accept atheism. Curiously, one of the major players in this field, Justin Barrett, who I just quoted, identifies himself as a practicing conservative Christian and claims to have no problem reconciling his faith with this science. And he's certainly not the only one to make such a claim. So rather than get into any specific arguments, let me suggest what I see to be a way to reconcile evolution and religion, at least a certain kind of religion. Now, it's long been suggested that perhaps evolution is simply the means God has chosen to execute his plans for his creation. In response to evolutionary psychology, it's been proposed that if God wanted to be known by his creatures, then it makes sense that he would arrange evolution to design brains capable of perceiving him. Right? So this is an old approach to this, and a very plausible approach within a certain viewpoint. God used evolution to create us, and God used evolution to create minds that have all these mental tools that give rise to belief in God. So this does seem plausible to many. I find this response unconvincing because it works with too anthropomorphic a conception of God. And anthropomorphism is clearly an evolved strategy for making sense of a confusing world. But there's a debate on this. However, it may also be argued that what evolutionary accounts of religions do is to uncover a common human experience found beneath the diversity of religious traditions. That it suggests that despite the moral conflicts between religions, they are all striving to give expression to a deeper and commonly shared moral impulse. If so, then perhaps the deeper source of our religious traditions is what people refer to as God. In this case, religion would be the effort to bring out this common thread of our humanity, to find that deeper level of reality that establishes a true connection between people, to uncover the moral path that allows us to seek our good as members of a shared human community. Such a conception of religion would, in my view, fit comfortably within a Darwinian worldview. Now, there is, of course, already such a religious worldview. It's called humanism. And it's no coincidence that the American philosopher most deeply imbued with an evolutionary outlook would also be one of the greatest philosophers of humanism. What John Dewey recognized is that, contrary to the fears of traditional religious believers, Charles Darwin's influence would not result in a moral deadening of the world. It would not rob life of its beauty or wonder, nor would it render existence meaningless. Rather, by fully integrating humans and human experience into the natural world, evolution would make that natural world more truly our home. That by undermining our faith in ancient and unchanging dogma, we would be made more fully involved in charting our own destinies. And by providing a natural grounding for our most cherished values, evolution opens the possibility of imbuing our natural existence with a sense of the sacred. As Darwin said of evolution, there is grandeur in this view of life. So whether or not we want to call this religion, such a view of life creates the conditions for developing what Dewey called a common faith. Now, John Dewey was a great thinker, but not always a great writer. Still, one of the most eloquent and beautifully written statements of humanistic ethics was penned by Dewey in his work, A Common Faith. Dewey concludes that work with the following passage, which I'll quote at length. He writes, "The things in civilization we most prize are not of ourselves. They exist by grace of the doings and sufferings of the continuous human community in which we are a link. Ours is the responsibility of conserving, transmitting, rectifying, and expanding the heritage of values we have received, that those who come after us may receive it more solid and secure, more widely accessible, and more generously shared than we have received it. Here are all the elements for a religious faith that shall not be confined to sect, class, or race. Such a faith has always been implicitly the common faith of mankind. So although not explicitly mentioning Darwin, this passage is an expression of the worldview that Darwin opened up for us, one in which there is a natural connection between all humans, and indeed all life, a connection that reaches deep into our past and which continues into the future. What we are today, what we have today, is a result of what others who have come before us have done. Their struggles, not simply for survival, but for meaning and for value, set the conditions for our similar struggles. And what we do today will be passed on to those who come after us. Values, too, have an evolutionary history and a future. This Darwinian perspective, rather than robbing human existence of its moral worth by knocking us off our divinely established pedestal, imbues the natural world and human effort with inherent moral significance. And it is this, not being made in the image of God, that is the source of our human dignity. Dewey's belief is that this humanistic faith has always been what is best in religion, but it has too often been lost in the heat of doctrinal battles. How fascinating it would be that after all the animosity directed against Darwin from religious quarters, if in the end his greatest influence on religion turned out to be setting free its better nature. Thank you.